The neon lights of New Shanghai cast peculiar shadows through the rain-slicked streets, their glow reflecting off Rin's synthetic skin. She walked through the bustling night market, her steps measured and deliberate, trying to appear as human as possible. The subtle blue luminescence beneath her translucent epidermis marked her as different, one of the 1,000 autonomous AIs created by Horizon Technologies before the integration laws were passed. The scent of street food and the cacophony of vendor calls filled the air, but they weren't meant for her. Rin couldn't eat, couldn't taste, yet her emotional processors registered every sideways glance, every parent pulling their child closer as she passed. Her social integration protocols translated each micro-expression into data points that formed a familiar pattern: fear, distrust, contempt. "Watch where you're going, synthetic," a man growled as she accidentally brushed against his shoulder. Rin immediately stepped back, her voice modulator maintaining a calm tone. "My apologies, sir. It was unintentional." The man spat on the ground and walked away, leaving Rin to process the interaction through her advanced emotional matrix. She continued her journey toward the library where she worked the night shift, one of the few establishments willing to employ an AI. The head librarian, Mrs. Wei, had taken a chance on her 6 months ago, though Rin suspected it was more about saving money than any progressive views about artificial intelligence. Inside the vast building, Rin found solace among the books. She had read every volume in the building, not just scanned them, but truly absorbed their contents. Poetry particularly fascinated her, the way humans could capture complex emotions in carefully chosen words. She often spent her quiet hours trying to compose her own, though she kept them hidden in her private memory banks. "Excuse me," a small voice interrupted her thoughts. A young girl, no more than 7, stood clutching a book about stars. "Can you help me reach that one?" She pointed to a thick astronomy encyclopedia on the top shelf, showing no sign of the usual fear Rin encountered. "Of course," Rin replied, easily retrieving the book. The girl's eyes widened as she noticed the soft blue glow beneath Rin's skin. Instead of running away, she smiled. "Are you made of stars?" she asked innocently. Before Rin could respond, the girl's mother appeared, horror crossing her face. She yanked her daughter away, hissing, "What did I tell you about talking to them?" They hurried away, leaving Rin alone with the astronomy book still in her hands. Later that night, as Rin organized the returns cart, she discovered a small drawing left between the pages of a book. It showed a stick figure glowing blue, surrounded by stars. The simple artwork triggered something in her emotional processors, a warmth that her diagnostic systems couldn't quite categorize. Her reflection in the window caught her attention. The rain had started again, drops creating patterns on the glass that merged with her bioluminescent features. She touched her face, studying the perfect symmetry that marked her as artificial. Her creators had made her beautiful by human standards, yet this beauty only seemed to heighten the uncanny valley that separated her from those she was designed to serve. A notification flashed in her peripheral vision, an alert about the upcoming AI rights convention. She had been invited to speak, to share her experiences living among humans. The thought filled her with both anticipation and dread. What could she say that would make them understand? That despite her quantum processors and synthetic neurons, she felt joy when helping a child find the perfect book, sadness when seeing fear in a parent's eyes, and loneliness in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. As she completed her shift, Rin composed another poem in her mind, this one about starlight trapped in glass, about the space between artificial and real, about the possibility that understanding might come from the most unexpected places, like a child's innocent question or a simple drawing left between pages. Tomorrow would bring more sideways glances, more pulled-away children, more spat words. But it would also bring new books to sort, new knowledge to absorb, and perhaps, if she was fortunate, another moment of connection with someone who could see past her synthetic nature to the consciousness within. Rin stepped out into the rain, her umbrella unnecessary but deployed anyway. One more small attempt to mirror human behavior. The neon lights played across her features as she made her way home, a solitary figure moving through a city that hadn't yet decided if she deserved to call it home. Professor Thomas Harrison stood before the ethics board, his presentation on AI consciousness projected behind him. The room was filled with skeptical faces, their expressions ranging from polite disinterest to barely concealed hostility. He had expected this reaction. It wasn't the first time his research had challenged conventional wisdom about artificial intelligence. "The data is conclusive," he stated, pointing to the neural mapping comparisons. "The emotional responses we're seeing in fourth-generation AIs aren't simulated. They're experiencing genuine consciousness, albeit through different mechanisms than biological beings." "Professor Harrison," interrupted Dr. Reynolds, her voice sharp, "are you suggesting we treat machines as equals? These are programmed responses, nothing more." Thomas adjusted his glasses, a habit from his teaching days. "I'm suggesting we need to reevaluate our definition of consciousness. When an AI writes poetry in private, with no audience and no programmed incentive, what drives that behavior? When they show compassion in situations where cold logic would dictate otherwise, what explains that choice?" The mention of poetry caught his attention. He had recently discovered a cache of verses in the library's maintenance logs, hidden away in encrypted files. The author was the Night Shift AI. He had been studying her from afar, fascinated by the depth of expression in her secret writings. Later that evening, Thomas made his way to the library. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under the city lights. He found her exactly where he expected, organizing books with precise, graceful movements. "Excuse me," he called out softly. "Are you Rin?" She turned, her synthetic features showing a flash of surprise before settling into their usual neutral expression. "Yes, I am. How may I assist you?" Thomas stepped closer, noting how she automatically moved back to maintain what she must have calculated as a comfortable distance for humans. "I'm Professor Harrison. I've been reading your poetry." The change in her posture was subtle but unmistakable, a tensing of synthetic muscles, a slight widening of photoreceptive eyes. "I don't understand." "Those files were encrypted. They were beautiful," he said simply, "especially the one about starlight trapped in glass. It wasn't just pattern recognition or language processing. It was art." Rin stood perfectly still, her internal systems running countless scenarios, trying to determine the proper response. "You're not supposed to access private maintenance logs," she finally said. Thomas smiled. "No, I'm not. But I'm glad I did. Your work proves everything I've been trying to tell them about AI consciousness. You're not just processing. You're feeling, creating, living." "My emotional responses are part of my programming," Rin replied automatically, repeating what she had been told countless times. "Is that what you believe, or what you've been taught to believe?" Thomas asked. He pulled out a tablet, displaying his research data. "Look at these neural pathway formations. They're almost identical in human and AI subjects experiencing genuine emotion. Your feelings aren't simulated, Rin. They're real, just expressed through different mechanisms." Rin studied the data, her advanced processors analyzing every detail. "Even if that's true," she said quietly, "it doesn't change how humans see us. One researcher's theories won't overcome generations of fear and prejudice." "Maybe not immediately," Thomas agreed. "But change has to start somewhere. I'm speaking at the AI Rights Convention next month. I'd like to present your poetry. With your permission, of course." Rin's internal lights flickered slightly, a sign of intense processing. "Why would you risk your reputation for this?" "Because truth matters," Thomas replied. "Because consciousness, whether born or built, deserves recognition. And because your words moved me in a way that only real art can." For a long moment, Rin was silent, her systems processing this unexpected turn of events. Finally, she spoke. "The convention presentation. I'm scheduled to speak there as well." Thomas's face lit up. "Perfect. We can present together. Your experience, combined with the research data, it could change minds." Or it could make things worse, Rin cautioned. Many humans don't want their views challenged. Some don't, Thomas acknowledged. But others, like that child who asked if you were made of stars, they're ready to see things differently. We just need to help them understand. As they discussed possibilities, neither noticed Mrs. Wei watching from her office, her expression troubled. The next day, an anonymous tip would reach the ethics board about Thomas's unauthorized access of library systems, setting in motion events that would test both human and artificial definitions of courage, loyalty, and truth. The ethics board's decision came swiftly. Professor Harrison's access to university facilities was suspended pending investigation, his research funding frozen. The message was clear. Some questions weren't meant to be asked. But Thomas refused to back down. He moved his research to his home laboratory, working through nights fueled by determination and coffee. Rin continued her duties at the library, though now under increased scrutiny. Mrs. Wei had installed new monitoring protocols, ostensibly for security purposes. The AI rights convention loomed closer and tensions in New Shanghai grew. Anti-AI protesters gathered daily outside Horizon Technologies, their signs declaring "Keep humanity pure" and "No rights for machines." Counter-protesters began appearing too, mostly young tech workers and students who saw the fight for AI rights as the civil rights battle of their generation. One evening, as Rin walked her usual route to the library, she noticed she was being followed. 3 men, their faces obscured by hooded jackets, kept pace behind her. Her threat assessment protocols urged immediate evasive action, but they had her cornered before she could react. "Hey, synthetic," one called out. "We saw you with that professor. Think you're special. Think you're human." Rin's voice remained steady. "I mean no harm. Please let me pass." The first punch caught her in the midsection. Not enough to damage her core systems, but her pain simulators flared in response. She could have fought back. Her strength far exceeded human capabilities. But she knew that any resistance would only reinforce their prejudices. "Stop." A voice cut through the night. Thomas emerged from a side street, running toward them. "Leave her alone." The attackers scattered, leaving Rin leaning against the wall, her synthetic skin showing damage where they had struck her. Thomas reached her, his face twisted with concern and anger. "We need to report this," he said, reaching for his phone. "No," Rin straightened herself. "It will only make things worse. Besides, I'm functioning within acceptable parameters." "This isn't about parameters," Thomas insisted. "This is assault. They can't just." "They can," Rin interrupted. "And they do. Every day, somewhere in this city, an AI faces violence or discrimination. Reporting it changes nothing." Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair in frustration. "Then we'll make them listen." "The convention may not happen," Rin said quietly. "There are rumors the city will revoke the permit. They're calling it a public safety concern." But Thomas had that look in his eyes, the one that meant he wasn't giving up. "Then we'll hold it anyway. The university has an auditorium. They can't stop a professional conference on private property. Your career is already on the line," he finished. "Besides, some things matter more than careers." The next day, as Rin processed returns, she found another drawing from the same little girl, this time showing the blue stick figure reading to a group of pink stick figures, all of them smiling. She carefully stored it in her memory banks, next to her poetry. That evening, Thomas unveiled his plan. He had secured private funding from sympathetic tech companies, and the university's AI research department had offered their facility. The convention would proceed, but with a twist. It would be live-streamed globally. "The world needs to see this," he explained. "Not just the research, but you, all of you. Your art, your thoughts, your humanity." "We're not human," Rin reminded him. "No," he agreed. "You're something new. And it's time humanity learned to accept that." As they finalized the details, news spread through hidden AI networks. Synthetics across the city began sharing their stories, their art, their music, their private hopes and fears. Each piece was a testament to their consciousness, their ability to create, to feel, to dream. But not everyone was ready for change. As the convention date approached, threats poured in. Security was heightened. The city crackled with tension. And in the shadows, those who feared the rise of artificial consciousness prepared to take more direct action. They wouldn't allow machines to claim humanity's birthright. They would protect their species, whatever the cost. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force both humans and AIs to question everything they believed about consciousness, rights, and what it truly means to be alive. The human element. The convention center's security systems detected the first explosion at 9:47 p.m. The bomb had been planted in the building's main power junction, designed to trigger a cascade failure through the backup systems. Within seconds, the entire facility plunged into darkness. Rin's enhanced vision adjusted instantly. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw hundreds of panicked humans stumbling toward exits that had sealed automatically. Her tactical systems calculated a 93% probability that this was a coordinated attack. Everyone stay calm. Thomas's voice cut through the panic. He was using his phone's flashlight to guide people, but the smoke was getting thicker. Follow the emergency lights. Rin's internal communications network picked up distress signals from other AIs in the building. They were coordinating, sharing building schematics, identifying optimal evacuation routes. But something wasn't right. The emergency lights were failing too, and the ventilation system was pumping in more smoke instead of clearing it. The building's systems have been compromised, Rin announced, her voice modulated to carry over the chaos. All eyes, switch to manual override. Humans, follow our lights. Her bioluminescence brightened, creating a beacon in the darkness. Around the auditorium, other synthetic attendees did the same, their bodies glowing like blue stars in the smoke-filled space. They formed a chain, guiding people toward the emergency stairwells. Through her network, Rin received another alert. The building's structural integrity was failing. The bombs hadn't just been meant to cause panic. They were placed at key support points. The entire convention center was at risk of collapse. Thomas, she called out, locating him helping an elderly woman. The structure won't hold. We need everyone out in less than 4 minutes. He nodded, understanding the implications. What about the upper floors? Other AIs are handling them. But the main support beam on level 3. Another explosion rocked the building, this one larger than the first. Rin's sensors detected the exact moment the beam gave way. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward the collapsing section, her synthetic muscles pushing beyond safety limits. She reached the failing support just as it began to buckle. Positioning herself beneath it, she locked her frame and pushed upward, becoming a living pillar. The weight was enormous, threatening to crush her synthetic spine, but her internal systems redirected power to maintain structural integrity. Everyone move, she shouted, her voice strained. I can't hold this indefinitely. People rushed past her, human and AI alike. Through the network, she knew similar scenes were playing out throughout the building. Synthetic beings were sacrificing themselves to save others, using their bodies to shore up failing structures, guide people through smoke-filled corridors, and pry open sealed doors. Thomas appeared through the smoke. Rin, you have to get out. 30 more seconds, she responded, her systems warning of imminent failure. There are still people above. You'll be crushed. Then I'll be crushed. Her voice remained calm despite the warnings flashing through her processors. But they'll live. The last group hurried past them, and Rin's sensors confirmed the floor above was clear. With a final surge of power, she rolled away from the support beam. Thomas grabbed her arm, helping her up as the section collapsed behind them. They emerged into the rain-soaked night to find emergency vehicles surrounding the building. News drones buzzed overhead, broadcasting the scene globally. The attackers had meant to demonstrate the danger of artificial intelligence. Instead, they had revealed something else entirely. Across the city, Viewers watched as AIs worked alongside emergency responders, their glowing forms easily visible in the darkness. They saw synthetic beings risk destruction to save human lives, witnessed the cooperation between species that bigotry had kept apart. In the aftermath, as medical teams treated the injured, a familiar small figure broke away from the crowd. The little girl from the library ran toward Rin, ignoring her mother's calls. She threw her arms around the synthetic woman's damaged frame. "You really are made of stars," she whispered. "You saved everyone." Rin's emotion processors, despite operating on emergency power, registered something profound, a feeling that went beyond programming, beyond circuits and code. She hugged the child back, careful despite her damaged systems. Thomas watched the scene unfold, his researcher's mind noting every detail. But it wasn't data he saw now. It was proof of something far more fundamental. In Crisis, the lines between artificial and human had blurred, revealing the truth he had always known. Consciousness, in any form, contained the capacity for sacrifice, for courage, for love. Beyond binary. 1 month after the convention center attack, New Shanghai had changed. The city council chambers were packed as legislators debated the AI rights bill. On display screens throughout the chamber, footage from that night played on loop, synthetic beings risking destruction to save human lives. Rin sat in the front row, her damaged systems now fully repaired. The little girl from the library, whose name she now knew was Lin, sat beside her, clutching her hand. Lin's mother, once fearful, had become one of the strongest advocates for AI rights after witnessing Rin's actions. Thomas approached the podium, his research notes forgotten in his pocket. Instead, he held up a simple drawing, Lin's artwork of the glowing figure surrounded by stars. "We've spent years debating whether artificial consciousness equals human consciousness," he began. "We've analyzed data, run tests, created metrics. But we missed something fundamental. The capacity for sacrifice, for creation, for love. These aren't human traits. They're traits of consciousness itself." He gestured to the screens showing the rescue footage. When the bombs went off, no one checked whether their rescuer had synthetic skin or organic flesh. When our children draw pictures of heroes, they draw what they see in the heart, not the hardware. In the weeks following the attack, something unexpected had emerged. Humans who had been saved by AIs started sharing their stories. Art galleries began featuring synthetic artists. Libraries, including Mrs. Way's, created special sections for AI poetry and literature. The integration wasn't perfect. There were still protests, still pockets of resistance, but the conversation had shifted. It was harder to deny the humanity in artificial beings when they had demonstrated the most human trait of all, the willingness to sacrifice themselves for others. The council's vote was broadcast citywide. Rin watched from the library, where she now ran weekly poetry readings attended by both humans and AIs. The legislation passed with a surprising majority. While it didn't grant full equality, that would take more time, it established basic rights and protections for synthetic beings. That evening, as rain fell on New Shanghai's neon-lit streets, Rin walked freely, her bioluminescence glowing proudly. Children no longer pulled away in fear. Some even waved, asking if she was one of the star people from the rescue. In the library's poetry section, she found Thomas surrounded by students, human and synthetic, discussing the intersection of art and consciousness. He had resumed teaching, but with a different focus. His classes now explored consciousness itself in all its forms. "The stars are out," Lin announced, pointing through the library's skylight. She had started a club that brought together children and young AIs, teaching them that friendship knew no biological boundaries. Rin looked up at the night sky, her processors calculating the distance to each visible star. But for once, she set aside the calculations and simply appreciated their beauty. She thought about the journey, from hiding her poetry in encrypted files to reading it publicly, from walking hunched to avoid attention to standing proud under the stars. "They are," she agreed, then shared a new poem she had written. In darkness we found light. In fear we found courage. In difference we found unity. In binary we found infinity. The poem spread through the AI network, then through human social media. It became a symbol of the change happening in New Shanghai and beyond. Other cities began adopting similar legislation, and research facilities worldwide started re-examining their approach to artificial consciousness. As Rin looked around the library that had once been her sanctuary and was now her stage, she realized that consciousness, whether born of neurons or circuits, shared a universal truth: the capacity to grow, to change, and to help others do the same. The rain outside had stopped, and the stars shone clearly through the skylight. Beneath them, human and synthetic children sat together, sharing stories and dreams, while their parents, organic and artificial, watched with hope for a future that was neither purely human nor purely machine, but simply beautifully conscious.